I don't know who needs to hear this right now, but if you're ever wondering who controls the relationship or who should control the relationship, I'm going to tell you what I think right now. So before I go over who should be in control of the relationship or what is the better form of control, the better hierarchy of control, I'm going to ask us a question and see if you can figure out where this answer lies. I'm going to ask you, where does control actually lie? I'm not talking about with the man, I'm not talking about with the woman. I'm like, what is control in itself? Where does this form of control actually stem from? Now, I'm going to give you a really wacky analogy, and I don't want you to confuse this with relationships, but this analogy that I'm about to give you, it's going to give you a perspective on where control actually sits. You have a slave master and you have a slave. Who is in control of the slave? Because I teach that we have self-control, right? But how can you have self-control if the slave is in control of someone else, an external force? Does not the slave have any self-control over his own free will, etc.? Or is it all given to this person, right? The slave master. So you could say that the slave master is in control of the slave, or that the slave is self-imposing his own self-control by the will of the slave master, right? Now, both are technically true and also not true at the same time, right? This is where control actually sits. Control is actually mental. It's a mental block, or it's a mental agreement on where the control actually lies. And so people are dictated by whatever this mental block or sort of agreement or fact or form is, right? And there is a bit of a pain versus pain ratio where people will think to themselves, if I go against what the mental block says, then I will be punished. This is very similar to the law. If you go against the law, then you will be punished for most of the time. The law is a mental block. The law is a mental agreement. Police powers, for example, get increasingly more insane, right? And this is just the agreement. And unless there's some type of French Revolution, then the agreement is going to remain or increase in that totalitarian manner, right? So now that we have established that control is actually mental, right? You put a soldier in the army, the soldier will either commit immunity by going against the mental block, or he will commit to the cause and the will of the generals, right? Control is mental. So that's what control actually is. So neither the man or the woman actually kind of are the control themselves, right? It's just something that we agree to. It's just something that we're either in possession of by way of agreement. Now, before I go over who is in control or who should be in control, I need to talk about something called the law of polarity. And this is basically in the universe, it's a bit of an alchemy thing, I suppose, where everything has polar opposites, particularly a masculine and a feminine opposite, right? Hot versus cold. Both are actually not opposites. They are actually the same exact thing. They're just varying degrees different. Light and darkness are the same thing. It's just they're varying degrees, right? Where does light begin and where does darkness end, kind of thing? Or where does light end, kind of like that. And so this polarity, right? There are extremities on both ends and there's a balance in the middle, okay? Keep this balance in mind. Now, the extremities have their place. They are useful for certain situations. For example, if you want to have a hot shower, then you'll have a hot shower, but you don't want it boiling because that extremity would probably kill you, or some volcanic bubbling water, right, in Dante's Peak. Or if you had a super freezing cold Antarctic bath, you will probably die too because it's just too extreme, right? Nature is like this. And so if we go to either extremes, they have their place, but they also are very dangerous. It's like the beauty of nature. And usually with some type of a balance is usually an elimination of both extremities or a unification of both extremities to some degree, or both extremities exist at the same time. That's how balance works. And I actually have a book here called Be Water, My Friend by Bruce Lee's daughter, Shannon Lee, which kind of talks over how to be living a balanced lifestyle, because living a balanced lifestyle is going to improve your life. You want to flow with the water, flow with the wind instead of resisting it and being rigid and then snapping under pressure kind of thing, right? Now stay with me. So if we now know what this law of polarity thing is, right? And we understand that balance is a very important factor to understand here in the realm of control. When it comes to relationships, especially romantic relationships and hierarchies, I want us to just slightly pay attention to this one other thing. You have a hammer and you have a screwdriver. The hammer serves a very specific purpose, right? And the screwdriver serves a very specific purpose too, right? Or if you weren't happy with hammer and screwdriver, you could always use hairbrush versus ruler. Both of these things, the hammer and the screwdriver, serve the purpose, right? Would it be right for the screwdriver to take the place of the hammer and the hammer to take the place of the screwdriver? It would not function. Likewise, in the same manner that a man has control over his dominion, it is best to leave the man over his dominion. Also, likewise for the female or the woman, I'm not saying that in a condescending way, by the way, I shouldn't have to explain that. You leave the woman to her own devices, to her own realm, the hammer and the screwdriver, right? When either of these domains try to take the place of the other or control the other, then this is going to lead to some havoc. This is going to lead to some havoc. This is why equality is not really the best way to go about unifying the balance. Instead, the better way to balance things would be more like the Swiss way, where you have, in Switzerland, you have the German side of Switzerland, you have the French side of Switzerland, and you have the Italian side of Switzerland. No one's necessarily trying to dominate over the other. People in Australia especially like to think that multiculturalism is this wonderful idea where we can be a melting pot and grow together. But then if everyone is special kind of thing, then no one is special. How can you be an Indian, and how can you be a Persian, and how can you be a British descendant if we're all just this one big thing that meshes together? How can you have the difference between a man and a woman if everyone's just trying to literally take the place of the other? It's like the tree saying that the tree wants to become the grass and the grass wants to become a tree. It's just like, what? So now that we understand that control is mental, control is an agreement where we assign it to, similar to the law, and we understand that there is a law of polarity and that certain things such as a hammer and a screwdriver have control over their own dominions. It is the agreement that the hammer hammers nails and can hit stuff with, right? A screwdriver screws things in, and you could technically stab with it too, right? When you try to exert some type of control over the other dominion in a realm that's not your own, this is going to wreak havoc. Much like feminism, if you have extreme or radical feminism where it's really just man-hating, then clearly it's clearly dominant, it's destructive, and not very useful for anyone. But if you have a very mild, generate, compassionate form of feminism, right? This is open, it's friendly, it's warm, right? That's nice. If you have no feminism at all, this would be like kind of deprecating to the women, right? Because then everyone would just walk all over women and disrespect them. And vice versa for the man too. Misandry, I think they call it. The idea that I'm leading up to with this, if you're following along with me, right? If you're staying with me, is that the real best way to have a relationship hierarchy is actually the biblical way. And this is where the man is the king and the woman is the queen. The king, like the hammer, does not take the role of the queen, and the queen does not take the role of the king, unless by some other chance that, the agreement is otherwise. It's like a business that has two business partners trying to leverage equal power. It usually doesn't end up working very well. And that's why usually the king or the queen will slightly have more power than the other. Usually this is the king. And when you have too much radical feminism, for example, trying to overtake the king, this is bad because a lot of destruction ends up happening, right? Instead, we want the king to be in possession of his realm. We want the queen to be in possession of her realm. The king does not need to overtake what the queen does. The queen does not need to overtake what the king does. Instead, you need to unify in this balance, this yin-yang thing, right? So instead of being enemies and trying to up one another, you actually leave each other to your own devices in this balanced way, this yin-yang way. And I decided to bring this video up because I was thinking about the idea of challenge. If you have too much challenge, you're constantly trying to overtake the throne, there's no stability, period. That's why more towards the balance, you have respect for the throne. And if you didn't have any, respect for the throne, or if you just didn't care at all, then you would be trampled all over by the throne, right? Keeping the throne in check per se, right? I hope that got you thinking a little bit. So leave a comment or a like if you enjoyed that or learned something new.